My name is Serena Lee, and I am the Vice President of Operations for the JAMS San Francisco Resolution Center. I've been in the ADR space for all of my legal career. Prior to joining JAMS, I was the Vice President of the AAA, the Commercial Division on the West Coast. So I want to take a moment to introduce our panel, our audience, some of whom may not know everyone that's on this panel. So I just want to make sure you understand the quality of our panel and the discussion, which will be very casual. This will be a conversation between SIAC and SVAMC. We welcome a dialogue and conversation, and I will get started with introductions. Of course, we are thrilled today to welcome Ms. Gloria Lim, who is the current Chief Executive Officer for the Singapore International Arbitration Center, which they call SIAC. We here in the Americas call it SEAC. Prior to joining SIAC, Gloria served in a number of different positions within the Singapore Ministry of Law, including serving as the Director of Legal Services of the Legal Services Regulatory Authority. She was also the Director of the Legal Industry Division and many other. What I found interesting also with Gloria is that prior to that, Gloria served as General Manager for the Community Mediation Center in Singapore. So she started her ADR career on the mediation front. So welcome, Gloria.
Thank you.
Next to her, for those of you who may not know, we have Sarah Reynolds, who is the managing partner at Goldman, Ishmael, Tomaselli, Brennan, and Baum. She runs.
We call ourselves Goldman Ismail and cut out the rest of
them. She is from our actually Chicago office, was based here in the Bay Area for many years. She also serves as a mediator, an arbitrator and counsel on domestic and international matters. She's been before the ICC, ICBR, AAA, JAMS, WIPO, HKIAC, as well as SIAC. Sarah is also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and is a trained mediator with the Center for Conflict Resolution. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And last, of course, but not least, we have Grant Kim, who is a partner at the San Francisco office of Lim Nexus. He serves both as counsel and as arbitrator for domestic and international arbitrations, with a specific expertise in IP and complex technology cases. Grant is also an arbitrator on a number of arbitral organizations. They sound like alphabet soup, but again, including ICC, ICDR, AAA, CPR, and the Korean Commercial Arbitration Board, or KCAB. Prior to joining Lim Nexus, Grant was with Morrison and Forster for 25 years, and was also at Kim and Chang for about 5 years in Seoul, South Korea. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Serena. Glad to be here.
We'd be remiss not to mention that it is Grant's birthday. So happy
birthday.
Yeah.
How is 50 treating you?
Thank you.
Well, the conversation, of course, today is really a broad overview of what's happening in Asia. And then we're going to turn the conversation to California's role in international arbitration, and specifically how Silicon Valley plays into that conversation. So let me start by asking Gloria to give us a general update on the arbitration scene in Asia.
Sure, happy to, and thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here. It's my first trip to California since the pandemic, and I have been so blessed really by the warm reception I've had by the community here. It's lovely to be here, to connect, and to meet with everyone. I thought that instead of just looking at me, I will give my presentation with the aid of some slides. And here is sunny Singapore. For those of you who have been to Singapore, it's a time to kind of visit again because it's opened up. Travel is easy, and this is the cityscape as it looks now. There have been a lot of developments in Singapore as a city, and I bring greetings from Singapore to all our friends in the community. Maybe turning to the first slide, I thought to kind of open the discussion, and I think you can just press next. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I thought to share this slide more to give everyone maybe a sense of the trending. So in the recent London Queen Mary and Fine Case survey that kind of measures international preferences for seats. There was the results showed that London and Singapore were preferred seats amongst international users, and then there were other seats as well. So actually, if you look at the survey in totality, you see a range of seats that come out. There's seats in Asia. You would see Singapore, you'd see Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai. There's seats in Europe. You see Paris, London, Stockholm. You also see New York, right, as one of the seats that people do know. And essentially, I think this gives us a sense of the pervasiveness of international arbitration. And I would say really across continents, we're seeing international arbitration being used. And also, we see that there are many seats here. A large number are in Asia. So one of the interesting things is whether you can think about a correlation between trade, right, international trade, and the transactional activity and the gravitation of some of this activity towards Asia, and therefore reflecting some of the choices that parties are making for seats. And of course, relative to that is also the companies that are going out and transacting and their preferences for seats and the reasons for that. So we can discuss that later. If I were to move to the next slide, and again, we share from the lens of SIAC and our experience as an institution nestled in the heart of Asia, we have seen a great degree of interest in international arbitration, and there has been growth. And over the past 5 years, the numbers are significant. We've seen cases coming from over 100 jurisdictions, and you can see from the countries there, they come from all kinds of jurisdictions and from all over the world, from A to Z. You can see that people, companies all over the world have been using arbitration as a means of dispute resolution. So if we were to turn to the next slide, let me share a little bit about, this is just a snapshot. So year on year, we would look at the kinds of users that we service. And for 2021, for example, India, China and Hong Kong and USA were the top three, we would say, top 3 users. And then we also had users from ASEAN, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and also cases from the Middle East. Again, like I shared earlier, I think this represents in a way some of the trade flows that we are seeing in our part of the world, and also the kind of cross-border transactional work that is taking place and between parties. And again, interesting trend to watch. This changes year on year, but generally for us, our top users have been US, China, India, and ASEAN countries. And I think we see this because, the cases are coming out of very strong economies with a lot of business and activity that's coming out of it. And for that reason, maybe we turn to the next slide. SIAC or SEAC, as you know us in the US, we have global offices, and thus far we've had global offices in Asia, but the most recent office is in the USA, in New York. I think this is in a way our response to coming closer to people who use us, and to ensure that we have a connection with our partners, and also fellow institutions, and also the community here, as well as companies that need to reach out to us in your time zone. So we get to the next one. Okay, and so this was something I thought could kickstart our discussion on the trends and developments in Asia. And so I think what we're seeing across Asia so far, and this is my characterization of kind of some of the trends that we are seeing. We are seeing very strong government support in many jurisdictions that are beginning to see international arbitration as an important means and part of the legal infrastructure necessary to support commercial activity, particularly cross-border activity. And we are seeing a lot of countries, push forward legislative reform to align their domestic international arbitration legislation with international best practice, adopting the ancestral model law and refining it. We're seeing a lot of governments also looking to see how their own frameworks can be adjusted to support international arbitration. So for example, in Singapore, more recent reforms, apart from the ones that are to align with international best practice, relate to, for example, allowing third-party funding, allowing conditional fee arrangements in arbitration, in the context of arbitration. We also see purpose-built facilities. In 10, 12 years ago, when Maxwell Chambers, and those who have been to Singapore, we have a building called Maxwell Chambers. And it's a little bit like a building that houses a lot of the hearing centers, international arbitration centers and arbitral chambers. And it's kind of like an airport. It's a facility, and people have their hearings there, but they also have offices there. 12 years ago when we started, this was not common. Of course, now we are seeing a proliferation of it. There's such centers have come up over the past decade. I think the third thing that we're seeing is a growth of institutions. In Asia, we are seeing domestic institutions being developed in different jurisdictions. We are also seeing international institutions setting up. So in Singapore, many institutions have a base here. We have, apart from SEAC, we have ICC, we have WIPO, AMC, we have PCA, the AAA also has offices here. And so we think that that's interesting because that also shows that there's reason, right, for the international institutions to seat their work for the region in Singapore and in Asia. Lastly, I think we see growth of ADR, not just in the form of arbitration. Mediation is beginning to gain traction. I think the institutions here with me on this panel really have deep expertise in mediation, and this would be of interest to those engaged in international mediation as well. That I think mediation is taking, there's some interest in that, and we are also beginning to see interest in hybrid processes. So, for example, ArtMed, which SIAC has an arrangement with our sister organization, the Singapore International Mediation Center, and that kind of marries the best of both worlds. So, just to give a flavor of the trends, and I stop here because I think there are others, but maybe, okay, before that, I'll add one more slide because I wanted to show a house, which I had drawn, and discuss a picture. Picture paints 1,000 words. This was something someone helped me put together. I couldn't draw like this, but I thought we could frame our discussion on this as well. That, in setting up an ecosystem, so Singapore has been a growingly popular seat, and I just wanted to share some of how I frame the philosophy. There are many layers to an ecosystem that we want to create in international arbitration. And if we were to use a metaphor like a house, I think at the foundation is the concept of the rule of law. And it's not just a concept, it's the practice of it, that we subscribe to the rule of law, we give parties certainty, predictability, and a transparent framework that supports the practice of international arbitration. We have very strong judicial support. That's the next layer. The judiciary has a very pro-arbitration viewpoint. A lot of the judges in our judiciary, and I'm sure this is something that resonates in other hubs, that the judiciaries are very pro-arbitration. Decisions come out and give parties comfort, right, that the arbitral awards will be enforced. There's the next layer of services, and that is in Singapore, we have different mechanisms. It's about a suite of services. So there's the arbitration, mediation, and litigation offering, of which SIEC offers arbitration. And then there's a talent and expertise layer, and then the infrastructure layer that I've talked about. And this forms this house. So I think that's the end of this part of the slides. I thought to distract everyone with some slides, but I hope you found that interesting. And,
I found it very interesting, and thank you so much for the data. We're, I think, always curious to see exactly what's going on in Asia, at least from your point of view in Singapore. Let me get some reactions from both Grant and from Sarah, as both practitioners as well as arbitrators. Was anything from the slides surprising to you or interesting? Let's stay on the Asia side of the content for now.
I mean, that's nothing surprising about Asia. You know, it's not even fair to say, you know, Singapore is sort of emerging as a leader in arbitration. It's, you know, a well-established leader in arbitration at this point, and you know, we're seeing such a proliferation of cross-border disputes involving parties in, you know, Hong Kong and Singapore and other places in Asia and India, that it's really become just part of, you know, where I think I grew up in a very European-focused international arbitration practice. You know, now disputes with Asian companies are just, you know, as much a part of the scene. And so it's not at all surprising to see that this infrastructure has developed the way that it has. And I do really like to think about the idea of sort of a ADR ecosystem. I do think is a really helpful way to think about it, because as much as we like to view the ADR practices as sort of separate from the courts, we do, you know, we need them to enforce our awards, we need them to confirm our awards, we need them to support the practice. And so I do think where you have, you know, jurisdictions in the US, and there is some variation across the landscape, you know, from circuit to circuit, and state to state, you know, particularly outside of the commercial dispute space. But, you know, sort of seeing that judicial support develop together with, you know, the rest of the sort of pillars of that ecosystem that you need to make it all work, is, you know, it's great to see it happening across the globe in a way, and not, you know, which is really what we need. You know, we need sort of a solid global infrastructure to support ADR, to really continue to move forward.
Grant, your thoughts and reactions?
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing surprising. I agree with it, but I would like to add a few things from my kind of both the historical and personal perspective. First, I'm enjoying my 50th birthday very much, but I am actually on the panel, probably the most senior person. So I do see somebody else in the room who's on the but I have to say, my first ICC arbitration was in Singapore in 1996. And we went there for a preliminary hearing, terms of reference, but there were actually also some significant disputes. Michael Briles was our arbitrator. And at that time, Singapore was really just starting. SEAC existed, and we actually had our hearing at the SEAC office, which was very nice. That was not at National Chambers, which didn't exist. But if you looked at the Singapore Arbitration Committee, it was basically Michael Wong was, you know, the godfather. He was the senior guy, and everybody else was like in their 30s or something. Very talented, but you know, you didn't have the history. It takes time to build that. Fast forward today, it's amazing where Singapore has gone. And I completely agree with that infrastructure and all that building. But one thing that was left out is the people.
Yeah.
You know, they're people. And what I've seen both Singapore, I've only seen it from afar. You know, Korea, I was there. I was there in Korea from 2000 to 2004. And when I got to Korea in 2000, nobody had ever heard of Korean international arbitration. I remember my first conference in Hong Kong. I went with a colleague. We showed up and they said, "Where are you from?" We said, "We're Korean." They said, "Amazing. We've never seen anybody from Korea at our conference here." Now, of course, it's just no big deal. But what I observed is a small group of dedicated people working together can do amazing things. And that's really history is made. Yes, you have to have institutions, all that other stuff, but it is made by people. And to actually be able to witness that and even be a little bit part of the history in the making is amazing. And the other thing they say about international arbitration is that it's a closed community. Some people even call the mafia. It's really hard to break in, all that stuff. And there's some truth to that. But I think Singapore has demonstrated that's possible. Korea has demonstrated it's possible. I mean, where Singapore is now is like amazing. And there are a few bumps along the way, but it's gotten there. I think primarily because there's a really dedicated community. I know the government's very supportive, but like in most countries, it's really the government acts when there's a constituency, when there are people pushing it. It's not like the government, the government's got a lot of things to worry about. And I'll come back to this when we get to California, but I think that is important lessons for California.
Right.
That's where I wanted to bring. I would say though, Asia is just absolutely a happening place for international arbitration. It's really vibrant. And when I first 2000, I went to Korea. I was at a Korean law firm for 5 years, and I go to these conferences. And and it's quite odd. You'd have to speak between a Korean and Chinese company, and we're going to London or something. It's like, okay, London's a nice place, and they have great arbitrators, but it would be nice to keep, at least some of these disputes should be decided within Asia and have maybe some Asian arbitrators. I mean, it's fine to have other arbitrators too, but now we're there. I mean, that there are now, and Michael Wong is one of a kind, but there are many senior arbitrators in Singapore and throughout Asia. And they're certainly highly experienced lawyers, and there are institutions as SIA.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about the panels and the selection of arbitrators in a minute, but let's bring us back to our coast and our side of the pond here. So, of course, in California, we've had a very robust and developed ADR community for many, many, many decades. And for many years, California has been, as you all know, the fifth largest economy in the world. A recent Bloomberg report has stated that we are actually poised to become the fourth largest economy in the world. Just California alone, we're surpassing Germany, and we're ahead of India, France, Brazil, and UK. 55 of Fortune 500 companies are based in California. We have some of the largest shipping ports here in America, in California. And of course, we are all familiar with the largest industries in California, including agriculture, film and TV, travel and tourism, and technology, which is, of course, why we're here in Silicon Valley. And the fastest growing industries in California include healthcare and construction. So, the question that we had all been talking about for the past 2-3 years is, does it make sense for California to be a seat of international arbitration? We see New York on SIEC slides and not California, any of either San Francisco or LA. I have a suspicion that perhaps international arbitration is actually quite robust here in California. I honestly don't think anyone has asked the question. I know that there are a couple of institutions who are interested in gathering this data. And I just want to turn, I guess, the conversation to my panelists here, maybe starting with Gloria, about what SIEC's thoughts are about California as a viable seat and why, Gloria, you're here.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe to start it off, one more slide, and just to give, one of the elements, and picking up on what Grant said about the elements, it is indeed it is indeed the people. Yeah, if you can hear me, it is indeed the people that make a difference. And one of the points that we look at would be
that might help.
Go ahead. Okay, and a completely open regime that's inclusive and open to international, work, arbitrators, lawyers, all coming in. And being a base for many of the international institutions, and having strong, even law schools, right, looking at arbitration, and maybe so that's just a slide to give a snapshot of some of the elements that that make for a strong seat. And I think California has this, right? You have strong community, you have a strong law school, you're also the center of a lot of activities for innovation, commerce, and many international companies are here. And so I think that there shouldn't be any reason why California does not become a very popular seat. In SIAC cases, we do see Californian parties and California being used, in the governing law. So I think that it's also maybe a question of data, which at some point, if we can get the community to support, right, collection of more data, and we share a little bit about that, that will give the international community a greater idea about what California has been doing in the area of international arbitration. So I think the future is bright.
We like to think so too.
Yeah.
And the data point is a good one, and I can just say in my own practice, it was rare, maybe 7-8 years ago, to see California as a seat in an arbitration clause, and I really don't think that is the case anymore, particularly with the increase in cross-border deals and development between companies here on the West Coast, or even in New York, even other places in the United States, and Asian companies. California just makes sense geographically. You're saving people that extra 6 hours to get to the other side of the country. And the infrastructure is here now. Historically, there may have been some issues with the judiciary that have largely been worked out, particularly with respect to commercial disputes. And so, you do more and more see California, as a seat in the agreements, and that is really, how you start, right? If it's not at that transactional level when the deals are being made, if California is not getting in there, there's not much hope for you later. But more and more you do come across clauses where you see California as the seat, which I'm always happy to see. So.
Yeah, I agree. It's becoming more common. I think absolutely, though, if you go back historically, California was being chosen as a seat, but there wasn't that much data.
That's right.
But in terms of advantage, another obvious advantage is simply geography and time zone. Asia is far away. Asia, of course, is a huge area, but let's say East Asia is 10 or 11 hour flight, and Singapore is even further.
Mm-hmm.
But other than like Seattle, which is actually slightly closer, because we are closer. We're certainly way closer than New York, which is also like 11 or 12 hour time difference, which is a nightmare, And why go to New York if you come to San Francisco, right? I mean, New York's got some great places, but geography is natural. Also, we have very large, Asian American community and lots of business. So those are obvious advantages. But going back to my prior theme, I do feel that people are really important. And another reason California was sometimes not being chosen as a seat is it was unclear whether foreign lawyers could appear in arbitration in California. There was some dicta in the California Supreme Court case. Now, the fact is nobody ever complained, and most people didn't even know about that dumb issue. But the sophisticated arbitrator lawyers for the really big deals did know about it. So they were not choosing California. It takes time for things to change. Are people going to start putting it in? And then once they start putting it in to the contract, you might have another dispute for another 5 or 10 years. So it takes time. But we certainly are going to see a wave. And I think, though, the fact is we were able to change that law. We were trying, the arbitration community in California, we made several attempts to change it. I think it was maybe our third attempt we succeeded. And it was very important that we succeeded, but I think it was a mark of the maturity of our community. We now had the connections. We had former Court of Appeal justices. We had other people. And, we got the ear of the California Supreme Court. That's always helpful if you're going to pass new legislation, right? And we did it. And we have arrived. And again, won't dwell on the history, but when I started out, in even 15, 20 years ago, there were a few arbitration conferences here, once every, in a blue moon. Now we have multiple conferences we have multiple conferences a year. And we have a lot of people, and we have also qualified arbitrators as well as counsel. It is that community, it takes a village to raise a child, or in this case, to build an international arbitration community. So plus the other advantages mentioned, obviously we have all the companies and all that stuff. I think we are definitely going to see a rise, and certainly Asia-related arbitration is the logical sweet spot.
Right, and of course, I also am quite active on the California Lawyers Association litigation section, ADR committee, which with some support from CalArb, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. Our California International Arbitration Week was wildly successful. It was all virtual, but in our first year, we had over 1,000 registrants from around the world. We have more organizations than we could actually accept for programs and for an opportunity to speak on and to learn with each other. I think the quality of the programming was very, very high. For those of you who, this is a pitch actually a little bit for the CLA ADR committee, but who are interested, all of that programming is actually available now streaming through the CLA. The CLA's attention was certainly piqued by the level of interest and the level of engagement. I suspect that in the coming years, we will probably rival New York's IAC. We're coming for you, New York. They will do it better. And hopefully those of you who are online right now will participate both as an attendee and maybe submitting programs that you're interested in attending. So
I wonder if we should mention that you're currently seeking proposals, right, for the content for next year. I think it's due the end of the month.
That's right. December 3rd is the deadline. Thank you for that, Sarah.
In case you want to plug, in case anyone wants to, submit any ideas.
And what's been wonderful, actually, is to Gloria's point about the collaboration and the tight-knitness of the international community. We have seen a lot of very friendly collaborations where many different institutions are coordinating panels and discussions. Not just in Asia, but of course in Latin America and in Europe as well. So I really feel like, as one of the reasons why maybe California was a bit sleepy was because no one had bothered to ask the question. And the moment someone asked the question of whether or not California is a viable seat, everyone came through and was ready, willing, and excited to discuss California as a seat. So let's turn our attention, actually, in the interest of time, to tech-related international disputes. So of course, Silicon Valley is home to maybe the world's biggest IP and IT companies. And I wanted to talk about how open is the tech industry to ADR as a process. Maybe I'll bat this over to this group over here and see what you guys think.
Yeah, sure. It's been sort of interesting and wild to watch, frankly, that develop over the last several years. I would say as recently as 6 or 7 years ago, even some of the most sophisticated tech companies in the world, many of which are located right in the neighborhood where we're currently sitting, were, I would characterize, had sort of naive attitudes towards ADR. There was a lot of misunderstanding, didn't really understand what it was. No real appetite for it. I think part of it is that the Northern District here in California, judges are relatively sophisticated and able to deal with high-tech issues and patent issues. So they were sort of comfortable with the courts and didn't see a need for it. That has changed. There's been rapid change in that respect. Certainly on the commercial front, probably first and foremost, but also, the sort of employment issues and consumer issues that tech companies are having with end users is sort of a fabled area of law here in the United States as we all watch it play out and be developed. But certainly on the commercial end, with the increase of cross-border agreements, we are seeing more and more of our, these companies adopting ADR as opposed to litigation. A lot of it has to do with a desire to protect source code and other proprietary information, and it views that it's safer to deal with those disputes in arbitration than in litigation. And some of it has to do with a transition from software products to hardware products. For example, Google makes a phone now, and so they are sourcing components all over the globe to make that phone. It's not software anymore that is sort of, was developed and produced here in the United States. There's been a real proliferation of cross-border development work for the companies that are based in Silicon Valley. And as a result of that, you're seeing a lot more interest in arbitration and how arbitration can help resolve some of these disputes.
Right. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I certainly agree that the lack of familiarity has been a big barrier. I would add, though, that, the other thing is a lot of the tech companies view the IP as their crown jewels. And the counsel are very familiar with what happens in court. They all know that it's really expensive and going to a jury trial on this complicated technology is crazy, but that's what they've been doing, and the devil they know, you prefer that to the one you don't. In addition, arbitration is sort of, brand X, right? If you go to court, you're not going to be blamed for going to court. If you voluntarily choose to arbitrate and then it goes badly, you may be blamed. So you never hear people say, I went to court, it was really bad, I'm never going to do it again. It's not an option. But if you choose to arbitrate it and it goes poorly, let me give you an example. So arbitration has been around for IP disputes. I was very fortunate when I joined Morrison Forster as a young associate in 1986. My very first case was at the time the biggest international arbitration ever between Fujitsu and IBM. It was like $1 billion or more, which now is not that big a deal. But then it was a big deal. Involved, I was interested to hear Duarte talk about source code. So had to do with whether, copyrights related to source code, in the case the IBM 360, 370 mainframe operating system, had been infringed, right? And that was subject to arbitration pursuant to a settlement agreement. Now, all the details of what happened are confidential, but I can say that IBM, after that, decided it didn't want to arbitrate disputes. We were representing Fujitsu, by the way, little plug. But and you have to have special permission in IBM to sign an agreement with an arbitration clause. I'm sure it doesn't apply to all contracts. Some. On the other hand, there's some companies that like arbitration. But regardless of whether you like it or not, I have to say it's happening. I have done over my career, I've been fortunate to be in counsel in a number of high-profile cases. I mentioned my 1996 ICC arbitration in Singapore. That was between the Silicon Valley Semiconductor Company and a Korean company that was not in the semiconductor business, but wanted to get in. And it was a tech transfer, which never went forward. And the idea was, the dispute was, what were the consequences of not going forward on your deal, right? So that was subject to arbitration. And I've had a lot of other disputes. You will have is, for example, you'll have global patent wars, and they get settled. And a lot of times the settle is some kind of complicated cross license or whatever. Sometimes it's a one-day payment and it's done with. But sometimes, let's say it's a 10-year cross license. 10 years later, you're going to fight again. But there might be an arbitration clause. So I've had some cases arise out of that kind of situation. I had one that it was actually molecular diagnostics, PCR-based tests, which are now used for COVID. This was pre-COVID, but our client, Silicon Valley startup company, had a test. They licensed various patents from one of the pharmaceutical giants. It was terminated. And then the question was the consequences. So they arise all over the place. Technology is so much everywhere. Even if a company says, I don't want to arbitrate, it's happening, So, I think we're beyond that. However, there still is a lot of lack of familiarity. And it's partly because you're familiar with what happens in court. And second, arbitration is, private, so you can't actually find out. We need more good examples of, hey, I arbitrated, it went pretty well. In fact, it was way better, right? And I think that's where Silicon Valley Arbitration Mediation Center, has a key role. And I think that's part of the core mission, is to educate people. Yes, there are actually some advantages. And yes, and this is at least as important, there are qualified arbitrators. Historically, if you look at it, international arbitration was like construction, M&A, these kind of things. And IP, this is like it was like a different planet.
Yeah.
And the culture is very different. People are speaking some other funny language. It's just like in Silicon Valley. When I first visited my brother a long time ago when he was at Stanford, I go to parties and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? It's like, I think it's English, but I don't know what you're talking about. So we need international arbitration is about promoting cross-cultural understanding. There are actually, other than countries, there are differences in kind of industries.
Yeah.
We need to promote that. And that's, I think, part of the core mission of SVAMC.
So that was the California domestic view. Gloria, what does it look like from your side of the pond?
Well, that's an interesting, and picking up on Grant's point, I think there's, if you look at different sectors, and indeed IP is a sector where it's complex because of the layers of rights and also the domestic regimes that govern the registration of those rights as well, and how those interface with an arbitration framework. But at the same time, IP and companies that deal with IP and tech are also normal companies. So while there's a very, very specific language that layer of the sector does speak, there's also a very common language, which is why in contracts, common issues that might arise, which may not require expertise in IP, but it may be just a licensing dispute, a breach of contract. And for us, we are seeing in the international space, IP type disputes involve commercial disputes. They could be investment disputes. They could relate to, IP, of course, competition, cybersecurity, data protection, and then there's that whole spectrum of disputes that arise. And I think in the international space, one difference is that then you would have to deal with, the laws of another jurisdiction. You will also have to deal with enforceability. And I think in that light, when you talk then about a US company dealing with, say, a party in Asia or in another part of the world, arbitration then becomes maybe the only option, partly because you may find that the parties get more certainty out of choosing arbitration, where you can choose your own experts to preside over the arbitration, where you can also have some certainty about enforcement under the New York Convention, as opposed to going to a local court. And some of the courts may be of another, there's civil law and common law jurisdictions and differences because of that. And you may want some certainty and therefore choose arbitration for its flexibility. And because so, I would say that some of these elements in the international arena, enforceability, comfort on both sides, depending on the bargaining power of the parties, make arbitration a lot more. And so we are seeing a steady growth, I think, in technology, IP disputes, and technology companies also embracing arbitration on their platforms. We see now quite commonly in some of the platforms, even cryptocurrency related and others, these emerging areas where they have standard form and it does refer parties to arbitration, and this lends itself to international arbitration. So I think there's a trend there.
And Serena, may I add one thing?
Sure.
It's actually a little plug for Singapore, actually, with regard to IP and patents in particular, which is one of my specialties. There is actually a threshold issue of whether you can actually arbitrate, and specifically the issue of the validity of a patent, because patents are kind of government granted rights, right? And so in most countries, the answer is yes. In the US, I'm happy to say US was very forward thinking on this. Many years ago, we passed a special law as part of our patent act that says, yep, you can arbitrate patent validity. But Singapore has a really, really excellent law, which I think is similar to the Hong Kong law, which it's even broader. It says IP rights, and then it defines them in the broadest way you ever heard. You can arbitrate anything you want about them. And again, as broad as you possibly, I don't know who wrote it, but it's incredibly broad. And then it says, and even if you can't arbitrate it in that country, come here, we'll do it for you, right? So the most famous example is China. Under Chinese law, the validity of the Chinese patent has to be decided by the patent office, the administrative agencies, which, is not a totally unreasonable view. In the abstract, if you are thinking that this is an action to hold a patent invalid, it kind of makes sense that you should go to the local patent office. But the way it actually arises is, for example, you have a patent license agreement, which is just a contract, and the parties agree to arbitrate disputes. and an issue arises as to whether royalties are due for some new product that didn't exist when it was signed, or maybe with regard to a new patent that didn't exist. And it may be that under the contract, you only have to pay royalties if the patent is valid and not infringed, right? And so in the context of a commercial dispute where parties have agreed to arbitrate the dispute, and the issue is really just one of money, validity may be at issue. And so in that situation, most countries that have considered it either by statute or by judicial decision have decided it's okay. But it's really helpful to have a clear law like Singapore does.
Right, right. Now, in the interest of time, I also want to take a few minutes to allow our audience, if they have any questions. I have a couple of further thoughts, but let me pause to see whether or not our audience has any questions or topics they want to raise, because we don't oftentimes have this opportunity to dig into the minds of. Are they permitted to ask questions?
Yeah, I think if people,
it looks like
they can unmute now. Yeah, if anyone online has a question, feel free to unmute now. And you guys as well are welcome to jump in. I see Les raising his hand.
Outside voice, please.
Or you can come behind us to the podium if you like.
That would be even better.
Well,
This is what happens
this
when
is
you're
really a
live.
surprise happy birthday song for Grant.
Oh, we're gonna find Les's hidden talents. So Les,
No hidden talent.
he has the same name as my dad, so
That's
it'd be
right.
quite appropriate for my dad to
That's
sing.
right. What a symbiotic family relationship we have.
We look just alike too.
Yeah. This is my question. You talked a lot about California Council and others looking to California now incorporating it as a site instead of a place for domestic and international arbitrations. But apart from San Francisco and Los Angeles and Palo Alto being very nice, the really critical part that, at least in my view, deciders on sites of arbitration are looking for is how good are the courts? Are the courts actually going to support, independent of the New York Convention? Okay, how good are the courts? Do they have people that understand arbitration? Do they have people who understand international business? Are you going to get a sustained enforcement of awards so that you're not forum shopping or something like that? So I'd like your view on that, okay? Because I think it's really reasoning, laser focus on why people would select California.
You want to take that one?
Well, I say generally the courts are very arbitration friendly. I have enforced awards here, and it's very fast. It's just a motion, and you get enforcement. But there is an issue that, and I think we sometimes get a bad reputation because there's issues as to consumer arbitration, which is a very different consumers and that kind of thing, where people really, if they want to do business, they have to sign an arbitration clause. And in that, the courts kind of take a dim view of it. But generally speaking, I think the courts are very supportive of arbitration. However, I do think it's also important to have a vigilant community, as we do now, because courts will sometimes get things wrong. I know Singapore, in the early days, the courts would occasionally come out with somewhat odd decisions, and then almost instantly, the Singapore legislature, which is quite functional, like some jurisdictions I won't mention, they pass a new law and get rid of it, right? So, because judges, to be fair, they don't deal with arbitration day to day. It's just an occasional thing that crosses their desk. Now, some jurisdictions also, I think Singapore too, they have like a specialized court for arbitrations. We don't have that yet, but there's certainly an advantage of having judges who are really thoroughly versed in it, because it's a little different. It's not your ordinary cup of tea.
Yeah, and there seems to be a proliferation of that in countries that are looking to be viewed as a seat. And they were seeing that in Ireland and other places where there are specialized judges to handle all the arbitration that comes through as a way to sort of create that ecosystem that you started us off talking about. But yeah, and I agree with Grant. From the commercial context, I would have no concerns about enforcing or confirming an award in California. I think if you're dealing in an employment or consumer context, you need to be working with expert counsel to make sure that you're not running into some unintended consequences. But certainly from a commercial perspective, I don't see any issues.
Gloria, any thoughts or comments?
No, I agree with the comments that have been said in terms of the need for the judiciary to have a kind of an understanding of international arbitration and the elements that would support it in its growth. I cannot share from the Californian perspective, but from a Singapore's perspective, that has been our experience. We have, and indeed as Grant shared, it's an evolution, right? And our judiciary has also begun to have its own deep expertise in international arbitration. For example, in our bench, our Chief Justice was a disputes lawyer. He understands international arbitration. We have set up the Singapore International Commercial Court, and that court has experts lawyers who were from practice. They came in and joined the bench, and they have deep expertise in international arbitration. And that allows for a line of judicial precedents, right, that's supportive of arbitration and gives a clear indication to the commercial community that this is a pro-arbitration bench. They understand the commercial realities and they will support arbitration. And I think that's important. And indeed, when you have that kind of, how would I say, predictability and certainty within the system, then that will strengthen the regime for development of international arbitration.
I can see a question from Paul Mason.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Quick question for Gloria. Good to see you again, Gloria, after Singapore 2019 and the convention. The question, I don't know if you have statistics to support, but how about enforcement of foreign arbitral awards by the Singapore courts? The Singapore courts have a good record in this area?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics, but generally the courts have been very supportive of enforcing foreign arbitral awards, and I think the circumstances under which the court would not recognize an award are limited to the New York Convention limitations, and the judges have been very judicious about respecting that, and so in general there is a lot of support for enforcement in Singapore. The judiciary here is very time efficient as well. The process is easy, and parties find that it is easy to use Singapore as a seat in the forum for enforcement as well.
Thank you very much.
Do we have another question or just one?
I don't see it. I think that was it.
Okay, well, I want to be again mindful of our time. We started a little late, but I wanted to offer each of you some final thoughts before we wrap up this conversation. We'll start with you, Gloria.
Well, no, I'm just very happy to be here, and like Grant said, it takes a community to develop international arbitration, and for us, it's a real pleasure to connect. And so I do reach out to the community here. I look forward to getting to know everyone. And I think we should connect. We should continue to exchange ideas. I think with everyone coming up, it's the community of ideas that will, I think, uplift levels of practice of international arbitration. And I'm looking forward to continued interaction with the community here. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sarah,
thank you. I'll go last.
No, I think Gloria said it all. It is definitely, for me, the greatest pleasure of international arbitration is meeting the other folks in the community. And together, we can do amazing things.
I think we've proven that over and over. It's been such an honor to have you, Gloria, here. And I think there are so many potential synergies between SIAC and SVAMC, and I just very much look forward to collaborating in the future. And yeah.
Well, I am delighted that SVAMC invited me to be part of this conversation. Had a lovely time getting to know all of you, especially Brandon and Sarah, but had a wonderful time getting to spend more time with Gloria. She was very welcoming when I went to Singapore a few months ago and was able to tour the National Chambers. And when Kevin Nash, who was from the register from SIAC, came to California, he did, which I took great pride in. One of the things that he did share was that he was surprised at the level of activity and the amount of arbitration that we were able to support, not just nationally, but just here in California. So I hope that bodes well for all of us here and internationally. Hopefully in California International Arbitration Week, we'll see Gloria and the rest of you participating along with SVAMC. So thank you so much for your time.
And I think with that, that concludes our annual membership meeting. So thanks to all of you who participated today and continue to contribute to the organization to help us grow. We really appreciate your time and effort and look forward to working with you all again soon.